Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, Israelis come out of the Yom Kippur holidays with massive new coronavirus infection rates. Israelis and Palestinians mark the 20th anniversary of the start of the second Intifada. And Israeli sports get set to begin in a whole new reality through the first Israeli soccer player to sign with a team in the UAE. A long, somber weekend in Israel as the Jewish community tried to mark the Yom Kippur, or Day of Atonement, holiday under lockdown. COVID-19 infection rates in the country now surpassing the United States for the number of coronavirus deaths per capita per day. Nini Manson with the report.
Yes, and we are coming 2-3 days before Yom Kippur to the source of water. And we're throwing the sins, and we have a declaration that we're a better person right now, clean, without sins. But this year, we are coming here to the park because we are not allowed to go to the Tel Aviv port because COVID-19, as you know. And we hope that this year will be better than the last year. And maybe we will meet next year in the Tel Aviv port.
A normally quiet and reflective day, the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur, has now passed, but not in the way we're used to. Sure, it was still quiet, just not for the same reasons. The country falling into its second nationwide lockdown as coronavirus infections grow exponentially, the death toll rising beyond 1,500. Israeli President Reuven Rivlin, for his part, calling on Israelis to stand together in spirit and keep those we've recently lost in our prayers.
כולם אוהבים, כולם ברורים, כולם אהובים, לכולם שמות ופנים, אוהבים ויקרים. אבות ובנים, סבתות וסבים, חברות ומכרים, שכנות ועמיתים, חלק בלתי נפרד מרקמת חיינו. יסלח לנו על חטא שחטאנו, ברפיון ידיים, על שלא עשינו מספיק ולא הצלחנו להצילם, ובשל כך חיים אבדו.
Well, overall, the holiday passed with little incident, most Israelis keeping to the new guidelines, conducting prayer services from home, staying within 1,000 meters distance limits, and otherwise socially distancing. That said, though, not everyone was so responsible. Many, especially children and their parents, taking to the empty streets to enjoy the national day off as usual. And this, of course, led to clashes. Israeli police forces spanning across the nation in massive numbers, handing out nearly 4,000 fines over the holiday for virus rule violations. New infections, meanwhile, rising at a new rate of 12%. Total active infection numbers in Israel now beyond 65,000, and the death toll reaching an alarming 1,507 as of this morning.
In other news, while most Israelis were praying or otherwise enjoying the time off, Israeli paramedics and emergency medical services were hard at work, treating over 2,300 people and delivering 2 babies. And with us to tell us all about it is Israeli Director of the Fundraising and International Relations Department with Magen David Adom Emergency Services, Yonatan Yagodovsky. Yonatan, thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure.
All right, so how many Magen David Adom paramedics and EMTs were active during the holidays?
Well, basically, most of our employees and the vast majority of volunteers were deployed and are still deployed because, as you know, Yom Kippur is not a regular day, and due to the lack of transportation, etc., we are activating an emergency deployment system, and practically almost in every neighborhood and every community in Israel, one of our ambulances or our motorcycles is stationed, especially during Yom Kippur, in order to have quick access to patients if needed. We activate thousands and thousands of highly trained volunteers and, of course, our employees to be able to be on call and to provide immediate medical treatment if needed to any person all over the country.
Wow. And so, where in the country were you maybe most active this year?
Well, it really depends. Of course, in the big cities, because there are more kids and they are taking advantage of the empty streets, riding the bicycles and roller skates, etc., and falling down and hurting themselves. This is one kind of or wide range. Of course, people didn't feel well due to the fasting, and that can be anywhere. And also in Israeli Arabs, the Israeli Arab communities and so on, that they partly continue the regular life while, there's still the shutdown, so also it affects them. But unfortunately, we did have a few car accidents, especially in the Israeli Arab sector, with some people that were severely injured. So it's an overall activity. And of course, delivering relatively young women that are expecting to deliver a baby in time to the hospital. And we have transferred more than 1,000 ladies in labor.
So that's actually, I was going to ask you.
The babies didn't wait, so we delivered them en route to the hospital.
Wow. All right. Well, yeah, I wanted to ask, of the 2,360-something patients that received treatment from Magen David Adom over the holiday, how many of those were coronavirus related?
Well, not a lot, because the overall work during the holiday in the hospitals, etc., was kind of low down, etc. We did activate a few drive-in test facilities in the Arabic sector in Israel, testing about 1,600 people for COVID. But there was much less transportation of patients from hospitals to rehabilitation centers, etc., because of the day. We today have much more work because of you can call it less activity over the last day and a half. And for example, only in terms of COVID, our working plan today is to test about 35,000 people for COVID all over the country in more than 70 locations, including home testing and senior citizens' homes, etc.
Yonatan, thank you so much. Bless you for the things that you're doing over the holiday and all that Magen David Adom is doing. Thank you so much for joining us. Happy holidays.
Thank you. All the best.
Now, in the meantime, as we move through the holiday closures past Yom Kippur and now towards Sukkot, Israelis are again asking for details on what's to come. But the answers so far have been bleak, to say the least. Over 1 million people globally have now reportedly died by the coronavirus pandemic, and the spread is nowhere near finished. Yet some version of life must go on, and Israelis with little to no details to go on are demanding to know when that will be.
Definitely blaming the government. I think that there's no planning, there's no organization, they have no idea what they're doing, they're very egocentric, they're only thinking about themselves. We were doing very well at the beginning, and then the pressure to open up was done impulsively. They opened everything all in one go. No one sensible would do that.
And mainly I feel depressed because I sense how the government are not taking any rational decision of this quarantine. It's only a lot of political reasons that brought us to this point that we are not dealing with the pandemic. We don't have any strategy.
But Israeli leaders don't have much in the way of good news just yet. Health Minister Yuli Edelstein telling Israeli media that, quote, there is no scenario that in 10 days we lift the closures and say everything is over, everything is fine, end quote. Adding that unlike the end of the first lockdown, this lockdown will need to be exited more gradually. In fact, if anything, the lockdowns may be extended to last for at least a whole month. Prime Minister Netanyahu warning that at least 1,500 Israelis could be seriously ill by the weekend, double the number of critically ill cases today.
ממש לפני כניסת יום כיפור קיימתי שיחות אינטנסיביות עם ראשי מערכת הבריאות וגם עם השרים, שר הבריאות ושר הבט"פ, כדי להבטיח שאנחנו מנצלים את הימים הקרובים להתארגנות טובה להמשך. יש פה גם הפקת לקחים ויש פה גם דברים שהם מתבקשים. יש לי כאן רשימה, היא כמעט שלמה, אבל אני חושב שהדבר הראשון הוא קודם כל הכנה מיידית של מערכת הבריאות, על פי יעד שאני הגדרתי, אנחנו נדון בו מחר, אבל אני רוצה להיות ערוכים לטפל בכ-1,500 חולים קשים בקורונה החל מה-1 באוקטובר.
The Barzilai Medical Center in Ashkelon has even now opened its 4th coronavirus ward due to the increase in recent hospitalizations. And the ultra-Orthodox community especially is now bracing for a post-holiday surge in infections. The average age of newly diagnosed Haredim falling below 26 years old, most likely as religious students are getting infected in yeshivas and seminaries before going back home for the holidays and spreading the virus. Still, many Israelis are protesting the government's actions, both in smaller and more local demonstrations, as well as by breaking quarantine to head for Jerusalem as usual. Protesters continuing to march against alleged corruption, in addition to calling for more sensible direction with the pandemic.
I really fear that the whole people of my society and the people around me and the people that are living here will not be able to express themselves, will not be able to live normal life anymore, because the way it seems for me now, the current rule is going into the way of fascism and for anti-democracy, and I cannot have it happen.
Long car chain from all over Israel to say what we feel about the situation in Israel right now. To save Israel from becoming a dictatorship, to save the Israel democracy from the hands of Benjamin Netanyahu.
Protesters also rallied in front of several ministers' homes, including the private homes of Defense Minister Benny Gantz, Foreign Minister Gabi Ashkenazi, Health Minister Yuli Edelstein, and Justice Minister Avi Nissenkorn. All right, well, speaking now of closures and breaking them, I'm joined by Israeli police spokesperson, Superintendent Mickey Rosenfeld. Mickey, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much.
All right, now, first of all, 4,000 fines for rule violations. That's what was reported. What were the most common violations this year?
Well, over the last 5 days since the general lockdown is being implemented across the country, we've seen the majority of the public who have been implementing the rules and regulations in the majority of the different areas, including the public areas. Unfortunately, we did see a small number, in fact, about 4,000 fines that were given out when people did not keep to the rules and regulations, some of them being within the ultra-religious Haredi neighborhoods, some of them being within the Israeli Arab neighborhoods, and some in the general public along the beachfronts in the areas of Tel Aviv, for example. But in general, our main emphasis is continuing both in terms of between the highways, between the different areas. We're talking about in between cities to prevent and minimize the movements of people from up to 1 kilometer. And we're hoping that the national efforts will continue for the next 10 days until further government decisions.
Well, so that's it. So we're now moving into the Sukkot holiday from Yom Kippur. What, challenges or lessons learned have you that is going to carry on into the enforcement over the coming weeks?
Well, we've assessed the situation in general across the country, both to make sure that we'll have enough officers to be in the right places at the right time, 7,000 police officers involved, including 1,000 IDF personnel working together in all of the different areas. We understand that inside the ultra-religious communities in the area of Bnei Brak, Beitar Elit, we need to emphasize more police work, as we've seen gatherings that have taken place inside synagogues, which is something that we've had to deal with. Extra efforts are being made also along the beachfronts throughout the north to south in order to make sure that our police officers are patrolling different areas, both on foot, both on vehicles. And of course, we're looking ahead towards the Sukkot festival, where we're waiting, of course, as of today, for the next government decision to see if there are any further rules and regulations that have to be implemented over the next few days, in fact.
I see. All right. Well, what about some of the protests? Because we understand that thousands of Israelis went out to protest against the government. be that against alleged corruption or against the rules and regulations of coronavirus. What was the general attitude towards the demonstrations? How did the police address them?
Well, our approach was to allow the demonstrations to take place at this moment in time, to allow people to gather, to make sure that social distancing was being kept as much as possible, 2 meters in between person to person. We also had a lot of police units that were on the ground, patrolling the different areas, asking people and making sure that they were keeping social distancing, and even giving out fines in certain cases, unfortunately, when people gathered very closely to one another. So in terms of the regular gatherings and the protests that are taking place, we're still waiting for today's decision to be made, the cabinet decision, the government decision, as to what the rules and regulations will be specifically for future demonstrations.
All right, but it sounds like in general the 20-person maximum outside rule was broken and allowed to be broken in a sense. It sounds like, is that correct?
Well, rules were broken, unfortunately. What was important was to emphasize social distancing, wearing masks at all times, as you can see, in public areas. I think that the approach of the public is positive. We're going to continue working together in order to make sure that we can minimize the number of people that are getting affected by COVID-19, as unfortunately we've seen the numbers go up so highly over the last week.
All right, Mickey Rosenfeld, thank you so much for being with us. Chag Sameach.
Thank you very much.
In other news, a unique Israeli test for COVID-19 is now making its way to an airport near you. The rapid SpectraLit screening test for coronavirus is soon set to pilot in 2 European airports, and it's developed by Israeli news site Imaging and the Sheba Medical Center. The test boasts a 95% accuracy rate, and it works in just a few seconds. All the passengers have to do is gargle a special mouthwash and spit it into a tube. And any passengers who are flagged by the test will then be referred to a standard swab test to confirm. But still, in a news site statement released last week, the company insists that tests will be immediate, affordable, and monitored so that airports and airlines can optimize the level of safety by mitigating the risk of COVID infection. Moving on, Israelis and Palestinians marked the 20th anniversary of the Second Palestinian Intifada over the weekend. Hannah Rifkin with the details.
The start of the 21st century was a bloody one in Israel, with the Second Intifada, or Palestinian uprising against Israel, beginning in September 2000. And intent on attacking Israeli civilians through guerrilla warfare tactics and suicide bombings, the conflict would go on to last for a full 5 years, claiming the lives of over 3,000 Palestinians and 1,000 Israelis. But 20 years now passed since the conflict began. Where do Israelis and Palestinians fall on the topic of regional peace? Well, Palestinians are seemingly most conflicted.
Through violence resistance, non-violence resistance, violence versus non-violence. Friends saying, oh, we should do violence resistance. Friends saying, no, we should just stand peacefully. We should try to coexist. And then growing up between that contradiction, actually wanting to what's right or wrong, it got me to the point of thinking that existing as a Palestinian is resisting, growing up to be a strong, powerful, intellectual person who has a sound, who has an idea and an aim, is resisting at these days. It stopped being just going against the occupation, but focusing on ourselves a lot.
As for the Palestinian leadership, in apparent attempts to strengthen support among the population, PA President Abbas has now announced plans to hold general and presidential elections in 6 months' time, the first legislative elections in 14 years. This, while Abbas also calls upon the United Nations to lead a, quote, genuine peace process, end quote, between Israel and the Palestinians, but few believe the rhetoric. Israelis, on the other hand, mostly remember the roughly 10,000 armed Palestinian attacks, which shook daily life in the Jewish state for half a decade during the Intifada. And such attacks have left scars on the Israeli population's outlook, with many having since shifted to the right, that is, more towards supporting Israel's continued security operations around Gaza and in Judea and Samaria or the West Bank. Further, with the passing of the recent Abraham Accords between Israel, the UAE, Bahrain, and the United States, more Israelis than ever are agreeing with the idea that peace with the Palestinians can and will likely come through peace with other Arabs in the region.
Now, speaking of the new peace in the Middle East, the UAE and Israel are eagerly putting their newly signed Abraham Accords to good use, this time through sports. A historic contract has just been signed between Arab-Israeli soccer player Dia Saba and the Al Nasser Football Club in Riyadh. And the 27-year-old Saba, a striker on the field, signed for at least a 2-year contract with the UAE for $3 million annually. Now, Saba is the first Israeli to play for the UAE team, but hopefully not the last, and vice versa. And until now, he's played for the Maccabi Tel Aviv club and the Guangzhou Evergrande Tabao football club in China. And with us to discuss the future of Israeli sports, we have soccer pundit with Israeli Sport 5, Ram Chaim. Ram, thank you so much for being with us today.
Hi, thank you.
All right, now how significant is this new contract for Dia Saba?
Well, I think it's something that would be unbelievable. We're talking about the United Arab Emirates League, who is already 47 years old. And right now with the new agreement between the states, it's really a breakthrough. It's a history that we have an Israeli player, a football player with an Israeli passport, to playing for an Arab nation, at an Arab nation. So I think it's enough said. No,
it's incredible, but are we going to see maybe the opposite? Are we about to see United, Emirati players coming to play for Maccabi Tel Aviv?
Well, I think it will be a little bit difficult because the wages there are very, very significant. It's very, very high. And I don't believe that even a club as rich as Maccabi Tel Aviv will pay these amounts to a player from the UAE. But for Dia Saba, I think with his history, with the point of his career, with his injuries stories, I think he made a great decision.
Wow. And so what does this say, though, because we mentioned the Abraham Accords, which, of course, made this all possible between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, soon to be Bahrain. What does this say about the future of Israeli sports, the future of Israeli soccer in the region?
The owner of Beitar Yerushalayim, Moshe Chogeg, has already made contact with businessmen from the UAE. Right now, we don't know much what is going on if the talk is still existing, but it's like a new door was opened.
Yeah, are we going to see like a new league, basically? Is that what we're looking at in the near future?
I don't think so. I think it's too much to ask right now. But I just wish for Dia Saba that this league, the new league that he's come into, will resume, because it ended last year because of the coronavirus situation, and next month it should get started. And a lot of people were wondering what will be with Saba, because his team could play in another countries in the Middle East who are not related with Israel, such as Iran, but his team this year will not play in the Asia Champions League. So right now he's got a time to settle down there.
All right. Well, congratulations again, of course, to Dia Saba. This is an incredible and momentous occasion for sports and, of course, for Israel. And Ram Chaim, thank you so much for being with us again.
Thank you.
And now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Temperatures are still hot. Lows tonight expected to be around 72 Fahrenheit or 22 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow should be mostly clear and warm again, with an average high of 91 Fahrenheit or 33 degrees Celsius. And now, before we go, of course, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel. Or should I say the daily dog video on ILTV? This is one of the greatest videos ever. The dog is rocking out. Oh, wow. All right. That is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.46 shekels to the American dollar and 2.59 shekels to the Canadian dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube and Roku TV pages. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you so much for watching.